Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Think Thursdays webinar series. I'm Andrea Green, Operations Manager with ThinkLA, and a member of our Diversity, Inclusion, and Gender Committee, also known as DIG. We're so happy that you could join us today. I have just a few announcements before we begin our conversation. Check out our website at thinkla.org for upcoming webinars, events, and membership information, and be sure to sign up for our newsletter for many great articles and resources. Today, we are so very fortunate to have members, colleagues, and friends of the ThinkLA community discuss how we continue to maintain diversity and inclusion. Joining us today are Walton, President of Walton Isaacson, Laura Small, VP, Director of People at RPA, Bianca Wilson of Safe Space, and Bridget Coulter of Blackbird. As you listen to our insightful and thoughtful speakers, please submit your questions at any time during the session via the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We really are excited to discuss how we maintain diversity and inclusion initiatives in this new age of remote work. Thank you all again for being here today. And with that being said, let's get started. So this first question is for all of our guests. If each of you could introduce yourself and tell us how your company is keeping diversity and inclusion as an important action item with this new way of communicating and connecting when everyone is everywhere. You could also tell us a little bit about your company as well. Aaron, can we get started with you?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for including me. Sorry, I was having a few technical issues joining, but hopefully you can hear me okay. Good? Awesome. Well, first of all, my name is Aarrg Walton. I am the CEO of Walton Isaacson. We are a full-service advertising agency. We have offices, well, I was going to say we have offices in New York, Chicago, LA, and Dallas, but now we have offices wherever our employees and team members are living. So we've got multiple offices across the country now, given the stay-at-home order. I know this may sound a little kind of off based on the question you said, and I don't want it to sound snarky, but this idea that D&I is an action item on a list isn't kind of in itself an example of what I believe is what's wrong with the industry and others who treat that topic that way. It smacks a little bit of privilege as if this is something that can be turned on and off when it's convenient. I'm a Black gay man who's, Black and gay 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and my employees are every color, every culture under the sun. And so it's not an action item that gets reprioritized. It's in the air that we breathe. It's expected of all of our colleagues, white and otherwise. So for us, it's really about making sure that we're all empathetic to cultural fluency. It's a required skill set at our agency, and either you have it or you get it, right? So ignorance for us is not an option anymore. There's plenty of information out there, and you can make mistakes, but you have to at least try, right? So to answer your question, I would say that our company is keeping D&I on, the question I guess was, the ways you keep a company is, for us, never put on that list. We have it as a non-negotiable, it's always on the list of things that we do. So that's kind of who we are and what we stand for and what we believe.
Awesome. Bianca?
Good morning. Thank you so much for that amazing intro and start to us, Aaron. So I'm a co-founder of Safe Space, which is a diversity and inclusion consultancy. So you could say that our whole mission, like it's not like it ever went anywhere. Kind of like you, Aaron, like we live it, we breathe it. I'm a Black woman, I'm a proud Black woman. So for me, it's not just an identity, it's, it's a way of life. And so the mission and the core mission and the commitment of Safe Space has always been and always will be to build a collective of thriving and equitable companies who are also making a positive impact in the world. And I can't think of a more opportune time when that's so relevant, of making a positive impact in the world. And diversity and inclusion is often put as like this side conversation. It's something that like has to be managed. It's something that has to be like, it's a sidebar. And if we have time, we'll get to it. Our whole commitment is that it's one conversation. So I think right now more than ever, having that be front line as access to whatever it is that we need, as opposed to something that needs to be like, we got to figure that out later, is more important than ever. And the way that we're doing it, besides the fact that we're a consultancy that's focused on it, the way that we're specifically keeping it alive and keeping it front and center and top of mind is that we actually have a program right now for diversity and inclusion change agents and leaders within organizations. And the whole intention of it is that they are given structures and accountability and coaching and access to resources where they can keep their initiatives not only alive, but actually thriving. So for us, it's about empowering the people who are on the front lines, who are doing this work actively day in and day out, whether it's their main job or it's a side passion that they happen to take up at their organization. It's like, how can we keep that life flow going? How can we keep the blood in those veins so that this situation, again, is an opportunity and not a roadblock to the things that they're already creating in their company?
Thank you, Bianca. Thank you. I really agree with that, with you and Aaron. It really is a way of life, and it really should be something that we practice daily. Bridget, love to hear from you.
Hi, thank you. Hello, my name is Bridget Coulter. I am a CEO and founder of Blackbird. I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I have a design firm that I run for the last 15 years. And similar to Aaron and Bianca, diversity and inclusion is just integral in, and as well as sustainability is just integral in the way that I operate, think, work, and in terms of the way I hire. I've always hired a majority women, always equal pay that I would charge to anyone else. And I've learned a lot about, even in working in Blackbird, our whole mission is seeped in the idea of advancement for women of color and her allies. So for me, diversity and inclusion also includes remembering not to be exclusive on the other end, and understanding that this conversation requires all of us to be united in it. And in some ways, the allies have a greater responsibility for understanding and participation because they have sometimes more voice than we have. And, you know, with all that's happening right now, the challenge for us is that we are a space that was created to literally have amenities and creativity and inspiration in physical space. And we are now challenged with how do we keep this diversity and inclusion, which you see instantly by walking in our space, how do we keep that in this virtual space? And we immediately pivoted to social media reach out and putting our members into a virtual world where we have these conversations. And, you know, we'll go deeper into that, but for us, it's such a infused core of how we think, how our company culture works, anywhere we're missing, you know, even as a multicultural Black woman, we miss. And I have to go deeper in and go, okay, this is a great time for us to have introspection, to look at how we've operated. We're only 4 months into operating before this happened. So we're learning so much. I feel like it's been a gift because we had this time in this intensely amazing, vibrant events and membership to then like learn how do we infuse that in the virtual world and make sure we're inclusive and then see where we weren't and learn from that. So the new way of communicating, I feel, has created an incredible opportunity to reach a broader audience. And now we have members in New York who are like, when are you coming to New York? And we just started, who are now very infused in it and bringing an East Coast sensibility that, you know, we're very West Coast. And then we have people from Africa who've chimed in. And it's just really been an amazing opportunity to talk about these issues. And our whole platform is based on having these courageous conversations. So our wellness, balance is just infused in what we're doing. So it's challenging, but it's definitely been incredibly inspiring to meet and expand our network so quickly on a scale that we didn't expect to happen until year 2.
Wow. Thank you, Bridget. That's really key too, because with everyone just going virtual, they're looking for information and they're learning. So the opportunities, as you mentioned, are just amazing right now. Laura, how about you today?
Thank you. I'm so glad to be a part of this. And this is the kind of event I would have signed up for were I not already participating as a panelist. So I'm already so glad to be here and so glad to be learning from all of you. But as Andrea said, I'm Laura Small. I'm the VP People Director at RPA. We are a 650 plus person independent agency in Santa Monica. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart and always has been. And RPA's motto is people first. So when we talk about inclusion, we're talking about embracing everything about people and encouraging people to bring their authentic selves to work. And I was joking with Andrea before we went live on the call. I think the gift that this time has brought us is we are getting to see the whole person. Like, I'm loving that I'm seeing Aaron's library behind him, and I'm getting a different perspective on him as a result of that. And, you know, getting a window into people's lives and embracing that opportunity and what it can teach us about each other and how we show up for one another. To me, that's been the benefit of this time that I certainly wasn't expecting at the outset. So excited to be having this conversation now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's amazing and just refreshing to hear everyone say, you know what, it's really just a way of life and it should just be happening at all times. And that really is key and important. And as Aaron and Bianca mentioned, and Bridget, everybody, that it's not a list, it's just life. That's what it is. And really appreciate all the answers for that. Bridget, this question actually kind of has to do with what you mentioned a little bit before. It has to do with communication. You mentioned, you know, physical inclusion and virtual inclusion. How does that translate?
Oh, you went a little digital.
Oh, okay.
I think
So asking we're in digital space. So how does physical inclusion translate to virtual inclusion with regards to diversity? You know, communication and inclusion.
That's a great question. Thank you. One of the things that we're finding is really because we had this opportunity. I don't know if it's my double. Are you guys hearing double or is it just me?
Now I'm not. I was before. I think I'm okay now.
Okay. One of the things that we're learning, and that's been our mission in this last 6 weeks of just pivoting and adjusting, is how does the physical space translate to virtual, which is your question. And that's been our question for ourselves. And we're finding that because there's so many tools that have been out there, and we're just like everyone else, we're using Zoom. I've always used Zoom as a designer for years because you can share screen and get a lot of work done, but I've never used it so much in this way of staying connected. And another part of it that's been pretty interesting is how to look at not just virtual, but communication through email, through any of the chats you use or the Asanas or the Slacks, is how are your teams included in those conversations? And because our team is so small, somebody who came on as a community associate was always key as that role, but because they're not interfacing, their role has expanded and they're growing, and all of us are just really stepping up to a higher level of interaction with our members, meeting them in a way through the virtual has been because everybody, like what Laura was saying, everyone's at home, so we're comfortable, we're talking from our authentic selves, the values that we have, we're sharing and talking about. So this physical virtual has been pretty interesting. I still miss that tangible part of it, but we exist as a diverse space. We're 80% women of color and 20% allies and men. So if we have one Zoom call, it's the picture of it. But then in terms of the action of it and the conversations and what people need, we're getting to, in a way, get deeper into some of that work than we were in the physical when you're also dealing with operations. So it's pretty interesting.
You know, can I say something too? It's really interesting with Zoom, right? Because, you know, we're all in these one-dimensional kind of video boxes, right? And you're seeing the whole the whole palette. And I become more aware than ever that often I'm the only chip in the cookie, right? I'm the only Black executive on the call, or the only, maybe not as noticeable that, you know, I'm the only gay LGBTQ executive, but it's really interesting for me to kind of see that dynamic, and it becomes much more apparent to me about the lack of diversity in some things, and the importance of making sure that the team is really well represented. And the other thing that I realized was that, you know, as incredible as it is to see each other's spaces, and I become really cognizant of the fact that, you know, not everyone has easy access to, you know, high-speed internet, and there are things that, you know, impact how that works, and how we kind of connect. And not everyone's, you know, quarantine reality is my quarantine reality. So you become a little bit more aware and sensitive to that sort of stuff. And I don't know if you guys have felt the same or noticed it, but it's certainly something that has become kind of very tangible and top of mind for me.
That's a great point, and I agree. It really does. Sort of divides this disparity between, you know, if you come from a place of what ends up being privilege of having a high speed in a neighborhood where it's easily accessible, versus at work when there was no, you know, we're all kind of on an equal playing field. That's a really great point.
Mm-hmm. That's a key part of diversity. That's also part of it. Not everyone has the bandwidth. Not everyone has like the backgrounds. Not everyone has the lighting in the space, or even the computer equipment that we need. So, you know, that's an important part of the whole diversity process itself. You know, that we have to think about as a company, do my employees have what they need to be able to function? You know, if they don't have it at home, they may not have that. So that's a key part as well.
I love that you brought that up, Aaron, and that was something that came up for us early on. And what we basically did is we set up appointments for employees to come in and get the equipment that they needed to be able to work from home. And we had our IT people troubleshooting. One of our IT guys actually went to someone's house early on just to help people with that stuff, because you're right, we make assumptions about our own lives and sort of put them on other people. And the reality is that other people have a lot going on, whether it's, you know, a busy schedule with now homeschooling their kids, or caring for elderly parents, you know, you name it. Everybody's got, you know, something going on.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I literally was just talking to our head of culture and communication last night. And, you know, so I'm married, but I don't have kids, right? So I don't have the responsibility of homeschooling. And it wasn't even something that I thought about until we were talking yesterday, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, we got to build in time for the staff to say, I have to shut down, I have to be a mom, I have to be a dad, whatever it is that I have to do, because, you know, my quarantine, like I said, is different than maybe yours or someone else's, and I have to look at my own privilege in that sense, and make sure that I too am playing it forward and being more responsive to the needs of the staff.
I feel like it's really making us think a lot more now about what people have and don't have, and how we can really be inclusive, and just really thinking about life in general. Like you said, Aaron, have kids, you know, or I have other things to do. You're thinking about those things now. They're really important now, more so I think than in the physical space, in the virtual space. I think that's super important.
Just
And to that point, I would add that we are working on schedules. You have to also set a realistic schedule, because even though I, as the founder, am going to work a million hours more than anyone else, we have what everybody has to state their lunchtime. Like, take your lunch. You're not available during that time. Go for a walk. Do whatever you need, because the amount of screen time that we have right now is also quite exhausting. And setting a schedule is also another way to like respect that everyone has diverse needs. And, you know, somebody's cat always walks over. She knows who I'm talking about. The screen, for some reason, whenever we're having a Zoom call, her cat's like, I don't like this. Or people's dogs, even if they don't have kids. Like, we're learning so much about the challenges of working at home, and people who have mates who also are working from home and have to figure out if they don't have enough space to have 2 Zoom calls at the same time, who's going to have the Zoom call, or is somebody going to go on the balcony with their phone? It's been really interesting.
Cool. Thank you guys for that. So kind of piggybacking a little bit on what we were talking about, with this virtual world of tech, you know, it might give some, like, an easy out. Maybe they want to be forgiven for some microaggressions in this D&I world. And that's really something obviously to think about, because delivery, intention, when you're trying to discuss things, what kind of tips can you offer for protocol, maybe to avoid these microaggressions and maybe go a little bit above and beyond for inclusion? Anyone can jump in.
I can jump in. Sorry, there was background noise. I think, well, there are 2 things. I think that what's happening right now is an opportunity, and it's highlighting the things that either have been already not working at an organization and the things that are working. So I think it spotlights and brings to the surface all the things that were already there. Like, it's not new. It's kind of like the purge. Like, this is what is already there that's working. Like, if you have a great policy for parents, right? Like, that's probably going to be highlighted now more than ever, because, like, thank God I have this policy where I'm able to do these things. And if you don't, it's going to be like, wow, I'm really suffering because of that. So with that said, I think with the microaggressions, like, undoubtedly every organization is going to do that. And for me, it's interesting. It's like, there shouldn't be any difference of what would be happening in real life than what would be happening virtually. And if anything, this is the opportunity to be more cognizant of that, and I know one of the questions was around, oh, sorry, I think there was feedback. Okay, so I think one of the questions that I was looking at was like around psychological safety. And I think actually this plays right into that, because we don't have the luxury anymore of having physical proximity to one another. When we have physical proximity to one another, there's nonverbal cues that we can pick up on. And so intentions, I think, can be misguided more so, and miscommunications can be like wildly more there in the virtual space. So for us, like, the pillars of psychological safety are curiosity, authenticity, and responsibility. That's what across the board. And I think that really applies to what we're calling microaggressions. Do you guys hear that feedback?
Yeah.
Sorry. And I think that those pillars are more important than ever right now in the virtual space, and being very intentional about our communication. So when I say curiosity and we're talking about microaggressions, it's really looking at, okay, like, what perspective is missing in this virtual room right now? What perspective is missing on this email? Who's missing from this email? And really being aware that, like, we need to be, if it feels like it's being over the top, and being very clear and direct in our communication, it's probably just enough. So being curious about, like, what did that person mean by that, and actually bringing more compassion into the situation, because we don't have the nonverbal, we don't have the energy or the proximity to one another. I think also, again, speaking to our pillars, curiosity, authenticity, like, how can we be more authentic in what we need right now? So if you are an underrepresented person, or if you're an ally, or if you're someone who's new to the conversation, it's like, how can we be authentic about, like, I don't know what to say in this situation, or wow, I really should not have said that. Or as an underrepresented person, like, being really intentional and being like, this is what I need right now. This is what didn't work for me. And being actually creating a space where that can be said, because again, we don't have the luxury of not that being in person should make up for it, but right now more than ever, it's like things will be very misconstrued. And then the last piece is responsibility. So what is our 50%? There's so much that's out of our control right now. So our 50%, like, what can we own? How can we be, how can we own the communication that we're putting forth to others? And how can we be responsible for the impact that we're going to have on other people right now with our communication or lack of communication? So if we know that the only thing that we can control is our own communication, our own perspective, our own way that we're going to see the world, how can we be really cognizant of intention versus impact? Because right now, like, intention can be great, but like the impact can be very different than that. So I think keeping those things in mind, like being curious about the perspective, being authentic about what's there for you and what you need, and then being responsible about like what's the impact that my communication or lack of communication is happening on myself and the people around me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Bianca. Really appreciate that. I would be interested to know if any of you could share any stories that may have raised some new inclusivity questions because of this situation.
I can share a story. It's really like a general, when we moved obviously to virtual remote work, all the team had a meeting that last day before we were in the space, and we were all like 10 to 22 feet apart. It was before the mandate. We closed before the mandate because it was just so much misinformation. And a lot of the team has different work styles, and we're hired to be physical in-space people. And we're immediately, we have to learn different tech and step up. And then one of the things that I'm learning is the Zoom calls, we're asking everyone to show up and put their face on and be part of the meeting. And some people are having a harder time with that than others. So there's also an emotional component of it where we're going through whatever different stresses we're going through, and we have to pull it together enough to show up on screen in front of the team. And so being sensitive to personality styles, and our team is diverse, and within that there's levels of like, oh, I'm super comfortable being on camera, and then there's like, oh, do I have to show up? Can I hide my hair in a hat? And there's presentation issues, skill sets that weren't required for the in-person job that we're all like learning and researching and growing. So I think part of what is really, in a way, it's like breaking my heart, even with the people I know, what we're going through is this skill set and this strategic thinking that I don't know that we all got. Like we're having to like skill set what Bianca's talking about, do it, and that's not our skill set. Is like learning new things in a training people to learn these new things. So this inclusive within this tiny group is really accentuating how much disparity there is in what we're given and what we come to the table. We come to the table with brilliance, but not necessarily these skills that help you excel. And that is the part that is really, we're pivoting towards. And very much in line with Bianca's like, okay, we're going to have to like have a session. Let's have a session where we meet on this. And we're doing some team training and education and all learning together. Because I didn't know how to use some of the products that we have either.
That's great. Awesome.
I'd also say it's interesting, humor, specifically jokes about things like masks, for example. Trust me, I get it. Humor, we need it to break tension often. And it's a great way to do that. But for, a lot of people of color, African Americans, Latinos, for example, wearing a mask is a real issue, right? And so, I've heard comments where, it's like looking like you're a gang member, people talking about wearing masks or a robber, and it can be insensitive, and it can be tone deaf to a lot of people of color. So particularly given the fact that, people of color, those communities are dying at a much higher rate than other communities. So, I think we have to be sensitive to that, and what can do, and just be realistic about the impact that can have on people as they're kind of going through this stressful time.
Yeah. With all that being said, with maybe someone being heard, or things being said that probably should not have been said. How can allies be supported, like during meetings and video calls, or maybe even after the call where things have happened? How do they address it later, and how can they be helpful and supportive?
Andrea, I'll speak to that because it's something we've been talking a lot about here as a leadership team. And I think it does tie back to what both Bridget and Bianca were saying about being very deliberate in this time, being very deliberate about how we express ourselves, being very aware. Like Bianca said, we don't have the luxury of physical cues as much. So paying attention on a call to someone who may be less comfortable or may be feeling excluded. And one of the things I've noticed a lot of our leaders doing is actively soliciting that person. You know, Jeremy, we haven't heard from you on this topic. Do you have an idea to add where I think maybe they wouldn't have been so conscious of that before? So I do think we are certainly trying and encouraging our leaders and line managers as well to just be very deliberate about that.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Everyone else like to chime in or good? Okay. Another question, Bianca, you did give us a little bit of information about the safe physical and psychological space. Were those what you consider to be some of the virtual best practices that we should be practicing now? We should be telling people when, you know, people are trying to practice being safe?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that, again, not having, that feedback is rough. The physical space aspect, I think, is really more critical than people have realized. And I think curiosity is probably one of the biggest things right now. And I said this to someone else, you know, there's kind of these structures that are dissolving around us right now, and they're highlighting the structures that don't work. So it's time to really look at the self-work of what are the internal structures that actually are not serving myself, that are not serving the larger community at hand. And that takes curiosity. Like, this is the time to self-reflect around, like, where is my communication being inclusive? Where am I intentionally or not intentionally excluding people? So yes, it is about like really being intentional with other people, but I would say the alternative of that is like really being intentional with yourself and really looking at the hard places of like, am I actually being inclusive? Am I actually curious about that other person's experience? Am I actually curious about like what that person is going through or their perspective? Like Laura said, like, am I being intentional about making sure that every voice has the opportunity to be heard? It's not like they have to, you don't want to force someone, but like, do they have a space where they can feel like they can speak and say what needs to be said? Or are they going to be fearful of being attacked or somehow ridiculed? So I think the curiosity piece is incredibly overlooked, but kind of one of the most important pieces.
Cool. Thank you. I'd like to, we do have a couple of questions from a couple of our participants, and Aarrg, I think this one maybe you can help me with this one. The first one says, how do you measure success? What, when are goals set? And are there actual corporations, businesses pushing back? You just talk about the word privilege. Can you define what that means when you're saying that?
So part of you cut off, sorry about some technical, I heard, how do we define success?
Yeah, let me read it one more time for you. How do you measure success? What and when are goals set? Are there actual corporations, businesses pushing back? And you spoke about privilege. Wanted to learn a little bit more about that, how you define that.
Yeah. So I'll answer the first question, the second part of that question first, and then I'll go back to defining success. I think, how do you define privilege? Look, I would also say, you know, I have to be careful myself about privilege, right? I'm a gay man, and in the LGBTQ community, experience very different than trans men and women in our community, right? And so they're getting abused in many instances in ways that I am not. So privilege isn't just about a black or white thing. I think we've got to look at it in the context of, you know, who we are and understanding that there are things that even for some of us who think that we don't have the privilege, there might be some things that actually are more privileged. I would say that you can't talk about D&I without talking about privilege, right? So you can't talk about this issue without understanding the impact that, you know, unconscious bias plays in how we work through our lives. And we all have it to some degree. The trick is recognizing that we have it and then understanding what we need to do what are the tools that we need to adapt to get through that so that we can help move a project forward, help move a community forward. And the community in this case might be the agency, might be the company. It's not necessarily just the cultural community. How do I define success? I think that is different for every piece of business that we work on. In general, I look at success internally at how respected the staff is that we're working with. Because if they feel empowered, if they feel a sense of power in as much as they can bring some true cultural sense and to work every day, they are going to perform better, right? They are going to ultimately do the things that the client wants. I always talk about D&I not in the traditional sense. I talk about D&I in terms of disruption and innovation, right? So don't think of D&I, let's reframe what that means. And for us, making sure that clients understand that the more diverse people that they have around the table, the better the outcomes are going to be for their business. And there's a science behind that. And the science basically says that companies that are more ethnically diverse are 16% more likely to outperform companies that aren't. Companies that are gender diverse are 32% more likely to outperform companies that aren't. And so that is very purposeful effort that we try to help clients understand if they want to perform better, that they have to have a diverse group of people around them. And this is why it works, because my background, who I am, is very different than who you are, Andrea, right? And so what I'm trying to do as a Black gay man is to bring everything I can to the party and convince you that my point of view, my worldview, is the right worldview. You're going to do the same as a Black woman and someone else as a white, male is going to do. And if you have this group of people around the table that have different ways of thinking and going through the world, what happens is the IQ of the group gets stronger and bigger, and the opportunity to go out and find those nuggets of innovation become greater. And so success for me is largely a function of how diverse the group can be, because ultimately I know that that's going to yield better business results for the client. Right. And more importantly, it's going to generate an environment where people at the agency feel free to speak up and to bring their true authentic self to the office every day. They don't have to worry about covering. They don't have to worry about code switching. They can be who they are and understand that that's what we're paying you to do. That's what we want you to do. So bring that. So I don't know if I answered the question. I hope I answered the question. That was a long
that was good. Thank you so much, Aaron. I really appreciate it. So then I have another question for you guys. You guys all pretty much come from the side. With that being said, there's different budgets, different trainings regarding D&I. What tools work for your size company? You guys are a bit larger. What tools have worked for you guys?
Andrea, you broke up at the end for me.
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. So with different size companies, there's different budgets, there's different trainings regarding D&I. What tools have worked for your size company? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone can.
I can speak to that. I mean, we're not an organization in the sense of like an RPA, an agency, or even Aaron's organization as well. But in working with these leaders, these D&I leaders from the different organizations, we're really aware of, like, especially now more than ever, what problems and what challenges are coming up around diversity and inclusion, given what's happening financially, given what's happening with the physical safe space, all of that. So I think, again, it's looking at, and this kind of goes back to the original question, that first question you just asked, Andrew, about success. Like, what does success look like right now? And it's going to be different per organization, per size of the company. But I think it's really starting to look at how much we can have diversity and inclusion be a part of the fabric and a part of what is happening on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to, and like that does look like tangible goals. But I think that the more that conversation can be included into one goal with the company as part of the mission, as part of the values, as part of the goals that are being set, I think that's really imperative versus like these very lofty things. Like that's the inclusion piece. Like diversity is obviously so important, having different identities and histories and experiences, but like, how are we looking at the inclusion piece of like our policies? How are we looking at the inclusion piece of who is being like the pathways for people to rise up in the company? So I think for me, what we're experiencing is so many people are dealing with like budget cuts right now because D&I is often the first thing to go. So it's starting to really get curious with different leaders or the different gatekeepers to whoever is making these decisions of like, what, in terms of diversity, including like what is important for you, because you're going to kind of speak to, like, you're going to kind of be a little tone deaf if you don't understand what's important for the leaders, for the organization's gatekeepers. So understanding like, okay, what actually would connect this to the core mission and the core values of the organization? How can D&I actually already just support what we're already up to? So I think really understanding the other person's, because just because I'm lit up about it and passionate and I want this does not by any means mean that the people who are making the decisions, it doesn't mean that they're on the same page. So it will be frustrating for you and frustrating for the other person making that assumption. So again, bringing that curiosity, understanding like, okay, what is important? How do we have this be like support what's already happening? So yeah, that's what I would say is coming up as we talk to these different leaders and change agents within organizations of different sizes and different structures.
Awesome. Thank you.
And I can chime in briefly on that as well in terms of the current situation where we're dealing with everything, a lot moving virtual, really assessing for me at, looking at my leadership style and just instead of assuming everybody knows what you're thinking or really asking people and mining your team for talents you may not know about and checking in and saying, hey, I know you came in at this, similar to what Bianca's saying about what's your role what's your possibilities for advancement. I know you came in with this particular role, but what do you see yourself? And you ask that question in interviewing, where do you see yourself in 5 years? But in literal day, week by week, month by month, asking your team, how's it going, checking in. We are an inclusive team, so it's sort of internal, but we're also, kind of allies and inclusive all working together. And then asking questions of allies in terms of how can we communicate to you some of the things that we need to have this real advancement? We have incredible, in a few short months, we've had incredible brand partners and community partners reaching out to us. We present diversity in our virtual programming and our Instagram Live and showing wellness and how many women of color, Black women, women of all races come out and are active and invested in this idea that wasn't really geared towards us. And just by completely showing over and repeating these images, there's just a lot of power to images and what images you're putting out there. And when you sign in sometimes to a Zoom meeting, and frankly, everybody in the Zoom meeting is a white man, what is the visual that you're saying about your company? I've been on panels that was wonderful. I was invited to this panel in New York with the head of 8 different co-working spaces, flex office spaces. They were all white men, and I was the only person of color and the only woman. And that just that existence of how hard it is to do the things that we're doing. Like, there's so much to change, but in terms of how do we use this time for positive change? How do we make sure we're being inclusive in our own team? It's twofold. It's like our team, and then also our brand partners and allies out in the world doing other things in support of us.
Andrea, can I say one thing too? I don't think it's so much, I think what you just said was so right on, but I don't think it's so much about a size thing, right? It's really more about a corporate culture thing. You know, where's the group's understanding of D&I? Where's the leadership? Where's the rank and file? That will kind of help inform the type of training that is useful regardless of the size. So speakers from, you know, different disciplines are really helpful, and, you know, academics, literary scholars, experts from, you know, subjects that, you know, that are broad and some really specific, but like those prepackaged corporate D&I you know, product often feel kind of superficial, right? And we've seen them, we've watched them. They almost feel punitive when you're watching them, like those early sexual harassment, you know, training videos often did. D&I and the focus of it needs to be inspiring and not punitive. It needs to be inspiring. It's not medicine, right? And so I think as you start to shift the culture and you start to make people think about it in a more positive way, in a more proactive way, that helps. It will permeate, you know, large companies and small companies.
I agree. Thank you so much for that. I do have a couple of other questions from our participants. I'd like to ask these two of you, kind of going back a little bit when we talk about microaggressions. Someone micro that it's small, and saying, do we actually need aid in seeing it? Are we down to the level that where we need aid in spotting aggression? Micro. And sometimes it is micro that you hear something or you see something. Sometimes it is a small thing. We're asking, do we need aid in spotting that aggression?
I think so. I think it's similar to what Aaron was saying earlier about the little comments about people of color wearing a mask to go out and how they look like a robber or a criminal. That just, those old stereotypes, repeating them and not addressing them in that moment, where a lot of people are uncomfortable dealing with conflict, but this is not even conflict. It's so small and it sounds like, oh, that is a joke and that's cute and that's funny, but calling it out immediately, and not in a punitive way, but in a, hey, I don't think you understand the implications of that, the history of that, how that ties in, or how, you know, as a Black woman, if you come in and you're a business person and you're strong and you make money and you do this thing, you do, like, you're suddenly like, oh, this angry, those old stereotypes still permeate. So when you see them in a small way, where it's just those little comments of, oh, you're one of those, or you're, it just nipping those in the bud in the culture in your company, not necessarily calling that person out, but I think the conversation has to happen in the rooms. I don't know, you know, maybe Laura or Bianca has some experience with that, just in terms of like, how do you change that in the room? I'd be really curious to know what you guys are finding.
So I might say something a little radical and I don't really care. But I recently have been doing sensitivity coaching, and it's been with executives who, like, there's been challenges in terms of like cultural conversations and just cultural challenges. And as a Black woman, I made the decision that, like, I am not going to have the emotional burden of explaining so much of the context of why this was a problem, why this was problematic, and the massive impact that it had on the culture and the underrepresented people at the organization. And what I decided to do personally was have this person and others on their team read the book White Fragility. I was not committed to teaching all of these things, because that's emotional labor. And that's a lot of what underrepresented people and what D&I leaders have to go through, is really like this emotional labor. So for me, and I this is something I said before, like, honestly, it is a lot about the self-work. It really is. And it's like, we say we're committed to this type of culture. We say that we are committed to inclusion and diversity. Like, it starts with having hard conversations with yourself. And that is on the ally part and it's on the underrepresented part. Like, what is our 50%? Like, where are we caught in a story that's not empowering for us? And as an ally, like, am I actually committed to doing the work? Like, or am I paying it lip service? And I know that's perhaps a little radical, but like, we're kind of in radical times, and there is a sense of fragility around, it is emotional labor. I just saw a comment, and it's like, that emotional labor really needs to be spread out. Yes. So with the microaggressions and kind of all of that, like, yeah, it is on the underrepresented or whoever felt like there was a microaggression, yes, speak out on it. And at the same time, like, how are our allies really educating themselves on it? So White Fragility is a great book. And for the underrepresented people who do not feel like they want to take on the task of having to teach every single person about why this was problematic and the impact and all that, like, I really like encourage everyone to like put that book or some version of it so everyone's on the same playing field. There's a common language and there's an understanding of like, this is the work that needs to be done. So that's my stance on it.
I love that. Thank you for saying that, because we do see, I'll just chime in to say that we do have a lot of women who come from other spaces, who are execs at studios, who come to us and say, I just need a place I can let my hair down and not have to explain anything to everyone. So thank you for saying that, and taking some of the burden off of us is a great tool that I'm going to take. So appreciate that.
Yeah, our voice is so important, and we have to speak up. Otherwise, nothing changes. We really have to speak, and allies are super important. I mean, they're helpful, but if you see something, say something, honestly. It's important. As Bianca said, sometimes you have to have that radical approach and, step out there and do what you need to do and say something.
But Bianca, I have to say, I love that you're doing the sensitivity training, because I think something that does come up in this conversation is it is hard, the old cliche of speaking truth to power. It is hard if there's a microaggression or a macroaggression to be the person who says something, and to Bridget's point, to being like, oh, you're one of those, or oh, she's so sensitive, or whatever sort of pejorative response people will have. And I think the fact that you're tackling it from the other side is a really, really important part of this work.
It really is.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, like, we have a executive program where this is literally what is happening. Like, we are discussing, like, what does inclusive leadership look like, and how do we really own, we're all racist, like, we all are, but like, how do we own it as a place of empowerment and a place where we can stand and break through that? So I think also, like, having it be a collective vision, like having it be a collective commitment of part of the organization, and not, again, as this sidebar conversation, because you can have 90% of your organization really committed to this work, really all about inclusion and diversity, but if that top 10% has zero interest, zero commitment, is doing zero work around it, like, unfortunately, it's just not going to progress.
Awesome. Great.
Bianca, I love the phrase emotional labor. I've never heard that before. It is so spot on, and it is so perfect. I was trying to explain to a client one time about, I have a big philosophy that, multicultural marketing should not be a line item on a budget, right? Because to your point, it's the first thing that goes. People have to start thinking about this as a business opportunity, and then the investment and all that sort of stuff will change in how they approach it. But I was trying to explain to this executive, a white male, what it was like for the women of color who worked for me, and the extra burden that they had. I don't even know if burden's the right word, but the extra amount of things that they had to think about every day. They still had to get the same amount of work done. It still, there's an expectation that it was going to be at the, amazing level that everything else, but they also, have to worry about, I've got a young Black son who's going to school, and is he going to, come home alive? I've got, I'm watching MSNBC or all these news, programs, and I'm seeing people who look like me under attack. And so there is that extra emotional part that they bring to the office that we don't account for. that plays a huge role in their stress levels and how they perform. I love that. I will always give you, I'll always give you credit for that when I ever use it again. But it's a great way to
Trademark.
I don't know if I came up with it. I don't know if I came up with it, but please feel free to use it because it's exhausting. It can be very exhausting.
Yeah, it's spot on with that feeling of exhaustion. Emotional labor is great. We're gonna have you trademark that. So
Yeah,
go
seriously.
ahead.
Right here.
File, please.
Another question from our participants. How does one respectfully disagree or present vital information to an executive team who are all the same gender and ethnicity? Being an African-American woman, especially when your professional tone may appear assertive by some.
Been in that room. I, do a lot of philanthropy, and I've served on boards, which also tend to be really well-intended, but mostly white men who have $1 billion who are giving to a great cause. So I'm on the board with, there's economic diversity in it, but often I am the last to speak, not because I don't try to speak, but you can't get your voice in for some reason. And then sometimes people will take what you've said and repeat it as if they just thought of it, like literally just happens in front of you. I imagine any woman has had that experience. But I try to listen to all the points, get to the point where it's finally my time to, kind of raise my hand. It's not really a raise the hand room. But then just articulate as clearly and as frankly as possible, like, this is important. I understand this. We're doing this for kids of color in South LA. I am a Black woman from a public education. I understand this in this way, and you guys have to think of whatever it is I'm fighting for. Usually it's making sure arts stay in schools because how valuable that is, and not just math and but I think you have to, unfortunately for me, and maybe you guys have different way, I try to just craft it in a clear communication. It's, what do we call it? You call it adjusting, how you adjust your language in a way that at least you can be heard, because like what the attendee is asking is you come off as strong. And I've been accused of that, and I don't care. I don't care. If the intention is right and what I'm saying is for the greater good and for the good of what we're doing, that's what's important. And I literally will talk like I'm saying right now, and I went off on someone. So it doesn't take a lot, and I don't know how we continue to shift that, but I try to just, for me, continue to keep a professional tone, be clear and be firm, and just say what's right.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you for that, Bridget. So I have one last question for all of you, and this is for the entire panel. With everything that we discussed today, and it's been some great information. I so appreciate you guys for this. Do you all have any tangible, like, diversity and inclusion actions that our participants today can literally virtually share with their companies for continued maybe growth, learning, and some positive change? It's essentially new seeds that we can plant now for our new norm going forward. Aarrg, can we start with you for that?
Sure. By the way, one of the things that I've said to people where, and I've said it jokingly, but they got the message, when people were talking about something and it was clear that they weren't considering or thinking clearly, I've said, you know what, I'd agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. And then I share the data. What I have found with a lot of folks is that the more data that I can share, and there's plenty of data out there, to help them understand how to help grow their business, the more successful I have been. There are people, and let's be real, that even when they see the data, they are, they're not moved by it. And that to me is a cultural shift that has to be made if in fact we want to be successful in moving things forward. I found that in some cases, working with employee resource groups at a company who have a vested passion for a particular way of thinking for inclusion has been a very successful way to get a culture shift at a company that may not necessarily just want to look at the rational data that's presented in front of them. Sometimes you need that groundswell of folks at an organization to get people to move. I don't know that there's one magic bullet, one magic way of doing it. I think everyone's culture, everyone's company is different, and you have to find the right thing that's going to motivate the leadership to understand how to get more innovative. And for us, that is all about a more diverse workforce and more diverse way of thinking.
Bianca?
Okay, I thought I was next. So I'll be succinct about it. I think the first thing is, again, being in discovery, like being in discovery of what your employees need more than ever right now. Like what they needed a month ago may or may not be what they need right now. And do they have a channel where that can be voiced? Do they have somewhere where like they can actually have the experience of being heard? Like, this is what's working, this is what is not working. Now, I'm not saying you have to act on all of those, but I'm sure you'll see a theme. So I would say, one, actually getting a lay of the land of like what is actually happening right now versus just assuming that like this sounds like a good idea, or like throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks, because that's very exhausting for everyone. And then back to the discovery point, like, and I said this earlier, but I would actually have, for the gatekeepers and the leaders and the decision makers, like, again, getting curious about like, what is their connection to diversity inclusion? Like, what is their passion point? Because again, it's going to be very different for every person. So taking the time to get curious, to get related to what's important to them, will make the requests for action a lot easier, but you got to lay the foundation first. So action is really important. And I think it's great, but I think you need to have aligned action so you're not caught in circles, or you're not caught doing things that like actually make a problem worse. And then the last thing I would say is, so Safe Space, we have a diversity and inclusion resource list. It's a Google Doc. It's ever growing. People can look at it. People can access it, add to it. So that's one resource of like, these are tangible things that to measure, to be measuring your goals, to be measuring success, to have just like places to stand of like, where do I even start with this? Mm-hmm. So those are the things that I would say, along with obviously like, we're a diversity and inclusion consultancy. So our virtual programs right now are incredibly important when community and resources and structure are critical, mission critical.
Great, thank you. Bridget?
Thank you. For my thought is that this is the opportunity and a truly authentic time that the nation, let's say 90% of it is on pause, maybe 70% is on pause. There's no reason not to pressure ourselves to be productive in the way we were. And I recommend you create an authentic, safe container in your culture. And in that container, you set aside a time once a week where you allow people without judgment to share something that they want to share. Somebody can write it, somebody can say it, somebody can email it. It doesn't have to be, not everybody wants to verbalize it, but respect and honor the way everyone communicates, and just create a safe container for people to share what they're going through. Mm-hmm. And then put that in a container, and then make sure that your culture is clear, mirror that back. And then as a leader, similar to what Bianca is saying, I've been being introspective, really mining my mission. What was our mission? Why are we doing that? Go back to the why. Why are you doing what you're doing right now? And what is the purpose, and what can you serve? And then as the leader, be vulnerable, be real. I have had my share of anxiety. I've had my share of joy. I've seen opportunities. I've been incredibly inspired. And just, I try to, at least every couple of weeks, remind people, hey, I know I'm, powering through this, but I may, there may be a Sunday where it's just like, I don't think I just need to nap today. I don't know what's happening. We're exhausted. So really being honest about and authentic about where I am, where where I believe we are, and then mirror back to people. And then our big mission is ideate and activate. So if you have an idea, let's listen to it, let's break it down together, and then you activate it, and giving people ownership in a way that I don't know that, your baby, you hold on, we're very startup and early, but now it's just like, okay, go own it, and it's blossoming into something beautiful. So if you can do that with your team and just start giving responsibilities, if something falls through, like, okay, that's okay. If there's a mistake made, one thing a really wise friend of mine said is just, you can make a mistake, but just only make it once. That same mistake. Then next time make a different mistake. So just that idea of just being authentic, going inside, having compassion for where all of us are emotionally. This is a global event that is still surreal. I still think we're in the twilight zone, but let's also acknowledge that in terms of what we're expecting us to come out of this with.
Wonderful. That's such great info. I really hope that people put that into practice. Thank you so much, Bridget. Laura?
Yes, and I'm just going to take this opportunity to thank all of you, because it's been such a privilege to hear your perspectives, and I'm really excited about all of the ideas you shared. I would echo everything that all of you have said, and yeah, Bridget, for us, it really comes down to empowerment, making our leaders accessible and empowering people to share ideas and run with them. So for us, in terms of our employee resource groups, like Aarrg mentioned, that's been a really exciting thing to see, and to see the grassroots efforts and ideas that come through that space and then actually inform the work. So I think if I had one piece of advice to give, it would be like, encourage your people, because we literally would not exist without the 650 people that work here, and they're the ones that are making this all happen.
You guys are amazing. It has been such an honor to have all of you here today. I cannot even tell you that with our new term today, emotional labor, how cool is that? Thank you. So we got some new stuff going on here. So thanks to all of our panelists for sharing your perspectives and your advice today. And thanks to everyone who participated in attendance. We hope this was so informative and helpful. I just know that if everybody here today who participated spreads a little bit of this information, it really is going to help to continue our dedication to how important this topic really is. So if your company has any great diversity and inclusion initiatives that are working and would really benefit others, please share them with us at Andrea at ThinkLA.Aarrg. That's ANDREA at ThinkLA.Aarrg. Thanks so much again for being with us today, and we hope that you join us next week for our continuing webinar series. We're going to have some agency leaders discussing the current situation and its effect on our industry. You can register for this free upcoming webinar and any of our other events, as well as learn more about DIG, our Diversity, Inclusion, and Gender Committee. It's all at ThinkLA.org. We hope to see you next week at Think Thursday. Take care, everybody, and we so appreciate you, and this has been awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.